People who've quit their jobs on short notice out of spite. What was the final nail in the coffin? I walked straight out of my job at DQ when I was 17. Basically, it was lunch rush, and since it was a Sunday, we had a skeleton crew since lunch was the only busy time of day. I had 11 orders on the screen with more coming in, absolutely flying around the kitchen making stuff. Manager was standing in the doorway, literally just leaning up against the wall, talking crap like, "Wow, you're kind of slow today," or "I thought you were faster than this." I was still getting orders out in 6 minutes, and she wasn't even offering to help. I was already sick of working there, but this pushed me over the edge. I asked if she was going to help, and she said no. I asked if she thought she could do better than me, and she said, "Of course." I told her, "Okay then, have fun," and dropped my hat name tag on the counter and walked out. Felt so ducking good. I got a job 2 weeks later in a department store, making more per hour, with no grease/heat and coworkers who weren't crafty people. Story 2. I normally worked a 5-1. This wasn't a, I worked there a month and quit kind of deal. This was a, I've been there for several years kind of deal. I worked up from a server to a cook. Pretty big deal for a 20-year-old kid, and I would always stick around when needed. This led to a lot of overworking. At least 2 or 3 days I did work 5A7P. Wasn't always cooking. I sometimes filled in, sometimes just watched over things. The worst of it was when I needed a day off, they approved it, but then said I needed to come in a few days before the day. Or when they just started scheduling me for 80-hour weeks, just assuming that I would have stayed anyway. But the worst part was that they changed how their pay works. Let's say minimum wage was $7. Servers would make $0.25 more for each year they've been a server. So I was a server for 5 years. The cap was 5 years. Meaning when I was a server, I made $8.25. Cook starting pay was $7.75. I had only been a cook for 1 year. So when I was a cook, I actually made less than when I was a server. I left there after I told them that I'm not going to be expected to work 14, 15-hour shifts just because they can't keep staff around. They threw that I got a cook position and should expect to pick up more slack of others. I got a job at McDonald's. They started me at more than I was making there. And I've gotten raises and already am a manager in training not even a year after switching. If you aren't happy at a job, look for something else. Being happy is important. It's so important. I can't stress it enough. Story 3. I was on contract and the boss asked me to put in more effort, which took some explaining. What he really meant was, "I want you to put in more hours for free." This was in a shape up or ship out speech following a lunch he'd had with my recruiter. What he didn't realize was that I'd spoken to my recruiter already and knew he'd told him a bunch of lies, which I called him out on. He was trying to explain things like, well, what I meant was, thinking my recruiter wouldn't tell me. At one point, he wanted to keep running me down, but I didn't want to hear it, so I told him so and that I would just pack my things and leave. He said, "But you have to give me 2 weeks notice." From day one, this guy had been saying no notice was necessary, and if he didn't want me around anymore, I would be gone just like that, with no explanation. So I told him that and that he'd said it was a two-way street, and if I wanted to quit, I could. No questions asked. When the conversation ended, he said he needed to talk to his boss before I could leave. I told him, okay, but he only had until I packed my things. I packed things up, waited about 5 minutes more, then left. I called my recruiter and told him what happened. This guy lasted a few weeks more, but was fired. I like to think I helped with that, partly because he had been blaming me every time something went wrong. But I'd also been doing some work for the company's CFO, which the CFO liked, but this guy didn't, but still tried taking credit for, even though he knew nothing about it. So when I left, I think it exposed a bunch of his other lies. Story 4. Back in my rocker days, I used to have really long hair, like almost down to my waist. I'm a dude. I worked in the kitchen for a hospital. I was a good employee. I was a hard worker, did my work without complaining, and did it right. I was never late, and I followed all the rules as expected. The manager always made it a point to remind me to net my hair or pick it up and under my hat. Kitchen staff wore hats. His reminders were perfectly fine and expected. After all, it was his job to oversee and enforce food safety rules. Then his, also a rocker, son was hired. His son and I did not work the same shift. In 2 weeks' time, he was late, stole food, and rarely netted his hair, much less pick it up. One day, we end up on the same shift. Like clockwork, boss man comes over and remind me about my hair. Fine, no problem. Work begins and I see his son with his hair out. I asked the boss man what the deal was. Why can that dude have his hair down? Boss man said, "Stop complaining. Other employees are not your concern." I clocked out that very second and never went back. I was off to basic training in a month's time. Best decision ever. Story 5. My boss actually came to my house, demanded to see me to my roommates, who inexplicably let him in and pointed to my room. My boss went into my bedroom, where I was in bed reading and, thank God, dressed, and he proceeded to yell at me for 15 minutes about the status of the calendar display. It was Christmas season. I managed a bookstore, and the calendar display was probably a mess because they were so hard to keep neat. Stunned that my boss came into my private bedroom on my time off, I simply did nothing. I didn't know that was even a thing someone would consider doing. My boss demanded I come in early the next morning, along with someone from corporate would be there, and I would get lectured on my calendar display and given lessons on how to set it up right. Then he left, slamming my door behind him. I called my girlfriend at the time, and she convinced me to just quit and come to see her. She lived 400 miles away, and stay for Christmas. Then I went to my roommates, asked them incredulously, "Why did you let that guy come in here?" "I don't know. He said he was your boss and looked mad." And then packed. I got a train ticket, took my store keys off my keyring, and got some sleep. The next morning, I walked into the store early, met my boss and the corporate guy, and silently I handed him my key and only said, "No hard feelings, you shouldn't have done that, though." I turned around, walked out of the store, and took a train to Cumberland. I spent Christmas with my girlfriend for a few weeks, came back to my place, and got another job within 2 weeks. Leaving a store around Christmas time, ducked my boss because he had to work my store, arranged for floaters to cover him, and he had to take over all the paperwork while running all the other stores in the district. He probably had to work 80 hours weeks over Christmas and into New Year's. According to my former employees, when I came back to pick up my last paychecks, my boss was shocked and overwhelmed. He seemed completely bewildered why I quit. When I told them, they were like, oh no, that's not cool. That's not cool at all. Also, I ended up marrying that girlfriend. Final blow. Due to his scrambling, he forgot to file. I had quit until mid-January, so I got paid for a month. I didn't work there. Plus, I got store bonus because I had been there a full calendar year according to the paperwork. Story 6. I had wanted to leave for months. The unprofessionalism and complete lack of managerial skills in a 5-star resort was embarrassing. I'd lie to people about where I worked. It got to a point where the money wasn't worth the condescension, and I'd saved enough to go traveling for a few months at least. Anyway, a friend's brother committed died. This friend was also a colleague. We're from a small beachside town. The first email he got from our boss, days later, was to make sure he handed in his uniform, or they would withhold his paycheck after he resigned. The boss knew about the tragedy. It was a PS on the bottom of the email. That was the last straw. Email went something like this. Dear staff member, please ensure your uniform is washed, ironed, and folded in the manner in which it was received, preferably by tomorrow. If it is not received in a timely manner, we will be withholding your pay until it is returned. Regards, management. PS. Sorry about your brother. I quit that day along with 2 other guys. Over the next 2 weeks, 9 more staff members from my department quit and 3 more from other departments. The toxic environment of that resort was too much, and the email just confirmed how little management cared about us. Bonus. I'm still friends with one boss. He said the other boss, email lady, was happy we left because she could hire a whole new team. A young, obedient, and impressionable team who would adhere to all her crazy rules, not workplace standard, but hers personally. And because the whole department save for 2 people had quit, no one could train the new staff to do the jobs. Weddings and exorbitant corporate functions were unorganized and rushed. They received poor reviews and feedback. Email lady was majorly stressed and had rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I'll have to get an update on that situation. Schadenfreude has never been stronger. Also of note, a few of us had previously planned an exodus in hopes of the department failing. Story 7. I got a job as an au pair in Sweden. I went to stay with the family for a week first to see if we got on. They were really nice, so I agreed to come back a couple of months later to start the job. But when I went back, things went wrong at once. They'd promised to come and collect me from the airport, but were nowhere to be found. When I phoned them, they said they'd gone to bed already and told me to get a taxi. The taxi got lost and they refused to help. They said it was my own stupid fault for not checking the bus timetables, but why would I check the bus timetables when they'd promised to collect me? They also badly underfed me. The parents and children would eat large quantities of expensive food while all they'd give me was 1 scoop of rice and salad. If I ate anything out of the fridge, like one time I was so hungry I ate 2 eggs, they screamed at me and told me I was wasting food. The father and teenage boys kept walking into my room unannounced while I was getting dressed and bursting in on me in the shower. I was meant to get weekends and evenings off, but they never gave me any free time at all. I had to work all day and babysit evenings and weekends. They made me do far more work than I was supposed to. I ended up looking after not only their 3 kids, but all their friends as well. I was also made to spring clean the house from top to bottom twice a week and do the entire family's laundry, which are not an au pair's job. And God forbid if there was even 1 shoe out of place. When the parents got home, they would scream at me until I cried. They were meant to pay for me to take language classes, have a mobile phone and travel card, but they didn't pay for any of these things. They also didn't give me my wages. If I dared to speak to the host father, my host mother would get angry and jealous and scream at me for talking to my husband behind my back. I only ever spoke to him to confirm my chores for the day and asked for my unpaid wages, but the host mother couldn't even handle that. This is the tip of the iceberg. The final straw was when a friend of mine was going to be in the city for a week and I wanted to see her at the weekend. But even though I'd had no time off since I arrived, the family said no because they wanted me to babysit all weekend. So I snuck out of the house on Saturday morning before they woke up and met up with my friend. I told her all of the things that had been happening and that made me realize how awful it was there and that I should quit. I asked her to accompany me to the house because I was scared to face them alone. When we got there, they were gone. I wanted to just run away, but they had taken my suitcases away when I arrived and I needed them. I didn't know where they were. They had also tried to take my passport, but eventually relented and let me keep it when I said it was the only ID I had on me. I phoned them and they had gone away for the weekend. They had left their pets, a dog, a cat, and a rabbit, unattended and without food. I told them a friend wanted to borrow my suitcases, didn't want to tell them I was leaving in case they rushed back, and asked where they were. My host father told me where they were, but warned me not to take them. I said, all right. Of course, I took them anyway, packed them, fed the poor pets, wrote a note explaining why I was leaving, and left. Story 8. When they showed complete disregard for my safety for the third time. I worked at a place whose name I won't say, but I will say they are the Canadian version of Walmart and are one of 2 big box stores in the Cayman Islands where I live. I can remember 3 major events that put me in danger that finally cemented my decision to get the duck out of there. The first was during my first month on the job. We had gotten complaints from the floor managers that the massive steel shelves, think like 3 stories of heavy-duty scaffolding, were wobbly because the nuts securing the feet to the floor had backed off or broken. The store manager comes to me and say, hey, I saw on your resume that you have a mechanic's certification. So that's the WTF that has to do with tightening shelves. I have no idea. Why don't you head to the back, grab all the equipment you need, and go through the store and secure them back down? I tell the manager that sure, I can do it, but that it would be best if we wait until after hours because it will require me to thread myself in between the shelf to get to some of the bolts. And they are more than massive enough to crush me if one of the guys bumped them with the forklifts or if they shifted at all. I'm assured that it will be fine and that the floor managers have been instructed not to operate the forklifts in areas where I'm working. I'm even given a nice red placard to hang up that states there are persons behind the shelves and to be careful. Okay, while I'm not super stoked about this plan, this at least reduces the risk to me somewhat, so I head to the back, get my assorted box end wrenches, and get to work. 4 hours in, I've basically contortion plotted my ass into a very tight space where I'm sideways with my chest pinned against one of the shelving units and my back to the other. I honestly can't even take deep breaths because the space is so small. I'm getting ready to move out of it when I hear the store manager and one of the floor guys arguing about something. I can't really make it out over the background noise, but something tells me I should hurry. I hear the floor guy say, fine, and then I hear the ever-familiar beep 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 of one of the forklifts operating. Sure enough, the pallet he's loading onto the shelf I had just been behind snags and pushes the shelving unit back and into the other one with a loud clang, and I see the space I had just been in close up like a ducking Tomb Raider trap. I shove myself back out completely and come out covered in dirt and rust, and there is the manger, the stupidest ducking grin on his face, and says, thought we lost you there for a second. It took every ounce of self-restraint I had not to brain his bald Canadian ass with the $2 wrench I had. Second time was when I was working the back assembling some display units and one of the dip craps decided to back a forklift out without looking and pin me between the display I was working on and the stack of pallets behind me. I was then reamed out for not paying attention to my surroundings. The third and final time was when the store manager tried to get me to stand on a stack of pallets and have a forklift raise me up to the top of the shelves, which was about 2 stories up. Told him there was no way I was putting myself in that kind of risk. He tried to browbeat me into doing it, but I wasn't going to get killed for this company's bottom dollar. I had recently heard back from my current job that I had gotten in and that I would be starting in 2 months. I said duck it, told them they had my 2 weeks and walked out. Needless to say, I didn't actually give them 2 weeks of my time. Story 9. I worked at a Tim Hortons on the night shift for about 6 years. We were constantly understaffed because there was this assumption that there were never any customers at night. Meanwhile, I'm spending my spare time programming and working on my personal programming projects at home. The plan was to only work there until I found something better, but I never bothered to actually look for something better. I mean, sure, I didn't have any degrees, but it couldn't hurt to try. Anyway, so one week the schedule goes up. We had a new hire whom was scheduled for Saturday night, Sunday morning with only me. I had no personal issues with him at all. But when I said new in quotes, it was because he had been let go 3 times previously from that same store because he was a no-call, no-show. Even that wasn't much of a concern. I could have probably handled both the morning bake as well as drive through by myself if he didn't show. The concern was that on Sunday mornings at 5 a.m., we received a truck delivery for the freezer, which I normally put away. The normal method was such that I was stuck in the freezer until I was able to clear out the latest dolly load. Furthermore, our headset radios didn't work within the freezer, so I would have to pop my head outside the freezer every once in a while in order to see if I was getting beeps. Okay, I think I could manage that. My plan was to have the driver cram what he could into the freezer as far as possible. It should fit, and at least that way, no product would be left outside the freezer or cooler. But every second Sunday morning, we had a large order for 20 dozen donuts for 5 a.m. This happened to be that Sunday. We had a talk with him. He'll be here, was the reassurance I got. Spoiler alert, he didn't show up. So I would have had to man the drive-thru, clean the display cases, wash the floors and tables out front, all while managing to do not only the entire bake. Everything had to be fresh for the morning, muffins, danishes, donuts, and then doing over double the normal amount of donuts for the morning order. I actually managed to get the 20 dozen donuts all ready by around 1 a.m. That was when I realized I wouldn't be able to take any breaks. I'd be run ragged all night. And in the morning, the people coming on in the morning would just complain about the stuff I wasn't able to do. I had technical expertise and had written some pretty cool programs. Why was I still there? Do I want to work here forever? Maybe the only way forward is to force my own hand? Is this crap worth $10 a ducking hour? So I left. I locked up everything as best I could and left. For a while, it seemed like the biggest mistake I would ever make, but as it all turns out, I was actually right, and it turned into the best thing I ever did. I've been working as a software developer for 5 years now, and I don't think I would be doing so if I hadn't made that decision. More interesting is that I popped in a few years later. I did like the night shift supervisor, and I was filled in that my little stunt was actually a catalyst of sorts. I had pretty much thought that other than a short time, where it was the talk of the store, I would be effortlessly replaced like so many others and things would go on. But apparently, that isn't what happened, because the food service company couldn't complete the delivery. The owners themselves basically got a bill for the inconvenience. So they started looking into the whole affair and apparently became very curious because a lot of other staff members related that I had been concerned about them not showing up. And then they had some pointed questions about why the person who didn't show up had been rehired so many times, only to be fired for that very reason several times. Apparently, the assistant manager was insistent on blaming me for it all. How I never phoned her to tell her so she could fix it. Except that the tapes clearly showed me picking up the phone and calling somebody. And yes, it was her. So that just made the owners even more suspicious that something weird was afoot. Then one day, they made a surprise visit and found her doing subsentences in the office. Apparently, she was addicted, and he was her dealer. Mystery solved. Not only was she fired, but management themselves, who had been largely hands-off, also came under a microscope because they knew. When all the dust had settled, the owners just decided to sell the franchise and make it somebody else's problem. And I kicked off the series of events that led to it. Story 10. Worked at Staples way back when I was 18. Got transferred when I moved with my dad. New boss tells me he personally accepted my transfer because he saw I was a good seller back where I was, and he would be happy to have me and yappity-yap all the good stuff. I was part-time, but still managed to hold second-best selling rates after the full-time guy, just as I did in the last store. They knew I had no interest in selling their bullcrap extended warranty, but I was good at doing so anyway. Even when I knew it was bullcrap most of the time. People bought my shtick every time. Suddenly, 4 months after transferring, I got a call from the store manager. Asked me to come in the office right away. Surprised, I go in and expect to talk about a raise, since I didn't yet have the 3 months raise we were supposed to have. He tells me I'm the worst employee he ever had. Told me I sold exactly 0 warranty for the 2 months I was there, and then that he was really thinking about firing me, but would give me a last chance to make it up for him. Also told me that I had the transfer only because he took me in pity, and that if he listened to my last manager, that I would never be here. That she, last manager, was super unimpressed and recommended to not hire me. Problem was, last manager was not female. It was a super cool dude that I still have good relations with. The woman in question was the Karen trying to overtake the manager position. Also, I had proof that I was there for more than 2 months, and that day, I had sold 10 warranties already. He would not listen to any of it, so I got up and went back to work like nothing happened. When I saw him coming back to look for me, I took off my shirt in the middle of the busy store, dumped my old-ass crumbling shoes in the middle of an alley, and folded my shirt on it, took my flip-flops that were under the counter, and walked home. I got a call next morning from my superior telling me how sorry the boss was that he had made a mistake. I came back next day to empty my locker, and the manager was apologizing profusely. He mistook me for another dude with the same name as me and got the wrong person. Duck off, you old fart. Story 11. Not spite necessarily, but definitely anger. I was working at a bar in a popular family-oriented restaurant. A customer came in who had previously been permanently banned for harassing me and other employees. The night he was banned, He said something extremely inappropriate about me, and when asked to leave by the management, became belligerent and started cussing and yelling in the middle of a busy restaurant on a Friday night. This guy had also been a regular who would always make the female employees very uncomfortable and would come in blackout drunk, then pitch a fit when we refused to serve him more alcohol. Him being banned was long overdue at this point. Guy walks in one night and sits himself right down at the bar, about 2 to 3 weeks after being permanently banned. I immediately turned to my boss, who was standing right next to the bar, and asked him to deal with this guy. My boss suddenly got all sheepish and started saying he had a long conversation with this guy, and he promised he would be on his best behavior from here on out, and to just go get him a beer. I gathered my belongings and walked out right then and there. Turns out, this guy was friends with the owner, and the owner was fully aware of the situation and was fine with it. They had been letting him into the restaurant and serving him the whole time he was banned on the condition he didn't come when I was working, because they knew I wouldn't be okay with it, but they also couldn't afford to lose me at the time. Gets story 12. I asked for a raise because I'd been there a while. Boss called me into his office a few days later to discuss it. Proceeds to tell me what a horrible worker I am and how I was lucky to not have been fired yet, so a raise was out of the question. That cut. I didn't think I was doing exemplary work, but there's only so much you can do in a warehouse. I gave 2 days notice the next day. I had no plans for my future. All I knew was that I didn't want to be stuck in a crafty warehouse job any longer. Bounced around a few odd jobs before I ran out of money. Then got my TESOL certification and moved to Korea. Now I've had a steady job for 8 years. The job itself is incredible, fun, relaxing, and rewarding. It's everything I wanted from work. It inspired me to continue my education, and I got my master's in TESOL now. I'm married to an amazing girl and have 2 beautiful baby boys. I own a house. Life is good. Everything worked out, but I had to hit bottom to get here. Duck you, warehouse. Story 13. I worked at a restaurant as a waitress, but the way it was set up was customers would come and pay at the window for their food, then we would deliver it when it was ready. Kind of like how fast food places work, but a comfort food / home cooking sort of place. So although I was labeled a waitress, I did a bit of everything except cook. I could write a book with all the crap that happened to me, but what overdid was one morning I got called in after having spent 3 days in bed due to a stomach bug. I was feeling better and went in. I was doing my runs for food, and one guy, one of the owner's favorites, took out one of my orders and gave it to the wrong table. The lady at the table ate it without realizing it wasn't hers, and I had to rush around to get it fixed. We ran out of that particular item too, so when someone who had actually ordered it couldn't get any, it was a cluster duck. I, of course, was blamed because it was my order and got lectured. I told a manager that it was the guy who did it and not me. She said she would take care of it, and I felt relieved. After the breakfast rush, I was wiping down tables and overheard the manager and owner saying that I was such a liar because they saw me take the plate out. Not true. I had been lying about being sick, also not true, since others at the restaurant had been sick with the same thing. And I was lying about being engaged to my now husband. I was so angry about the whole thing I went and threw up. Also probably still a bit of sickness left over. I did the dumb thing though and took it to social media after work. I didn't give any clues to the circumstances, but I posted something like, apparently I'm nothing but a liar. F this place. I didn't think it was anything that really gave way to what was going on, so I didn't think much of it. The next day I got pulled into the back by the owners and lectured for slander online. I argued, why were they so certain I was talking about them when I didn't say it was them unless they really had said it? They just went on and on about the already bad reputation the place had, and what I did wasn't helping, so I needed to delete it. They never answered my question, just danced around it. I said they know, and if it was as bad as they said, why didn't they just fire me? I could see the instant fear flash across both of their faces before they told me they just wanted it to be a learning experience. I realized that they didn't want to fire me. We were short-staffed and nobody stuck around for long, wonder why, and I actually did my job. I went home that night and typed up a letter of resignation with the next day's date on it as my final day. I gave it to them the next day. Got lectured yet again about how unprofessional I was for not giving a proper notice, and that I would never be able to use the place as a reference, nor would I be rehired. I told her to be careful because I could consider that slander of my character. After all that, they also tried to cheat me out of 3 days worth of work, which I threatened to call up the labor board and OSHA because no one working there had a food handler's license, and I had been working those days as shown on cameras that were placed around the place. I got my money and finally was done with the place. Sorry for the long story, but I could literally go on for quite a while about all the crap these people pulled on me. Story 14. The final nail was when my boss asked me, her assistant manager, to disperse employee checks while she was on vacation. They were mailed from the home office, and I had to separate and put them all in envelopes. It was then that I realized Karen only offered me 50 cents more an hour than her favorite donut maker. She was also making considerably more than the other donut maker as well. When she got back, I asked her about it. Told me it was a mistake. The next payday, she asked me to do the checks when I came in for my shift. No problem, with the exception that she had taken the donut maker's check out and gave it to her personally so I wouldn't see it. That was the final straw. I'm not going to be blatantly lied to or taken advantage of. So the next day, I went in 10 minutes before my shift was to start and threw my name tag on the counter. Manager was worker register, and told her that I can't stand a liar, and I'm not going to work for someone like that. The look on her face was awesome. My coworkers told me she had to stay and cover my shift and all my shifts, as well as her own, for almost a month. I took 2 weeks off and found another job that ended up paying way better with better hours. Duck you, Kathy. Story 15. I was a nanny maid right after college, and my first family consisted of a dad that worked all of the time and a mom who worked part-time from home. Not only did this lady barely work, she just went behind me and corrected everything I cleaned. Don't put the groceries on the counter. You don't know what those bags have touched. Don't put your phone on the counter. It has germs. Put the dishes short to tall on the drying rack, wiping them counterclockwise. Make sure the kids wear plastic smocks while they eat so they don't get dirty. There was a system for everything, and I do mean everything. She clearly had some issues with anxiety that translated to cleaning everything in a methodical way. That's fine. I can clean the way she wants me to. She told me her son was deathly allergic to dairy, nuts, and a couple of other things. She even gave me a practice EpiPen. She asked that I wash my hands before coming to her house, and once I got there, always keep my hair up and that I not wear makeup. I agreed because allergies are serious, but when talking to her son's daycare teacher, I found out that he didn't have any of these allergies. He was merely lactose intolerant. So I confirmed with the school nurse. I got this cold, sinking feeling in my stomach, realizing she had made all of this fear of allergens up in her head. All of this I could deal with, but she also had the perspective that she could treat people beneath her badly, talked down to people in service jobs, ignored working people, etc. Well, on top of my daily cleaning, she had a cleaning service come in once a week to do a deep clean. Most of these people were Latinas who didn't speak very much English, which prompted my employers to treat them without any respect. One day, she tried to get one of the cleaning ladies fired from the service for breaking her husband's second phone, UTF, which she didn't. This poor cleaning lady is on the verge of tears as my boss is on the phone trying to fire her, and I just decided that would be my last day of working for her. This woman was so ducking entitled, privileged, and bored with her life that she got off on trying to get this cleaning lady fired. This woman barely speaks English and cleans houses. You have 2 maids. So why do you feel the need to duck her over for something that wasn't her fault and B, wasn't a big deal? It's a second phone your husband doesn't use. And this wasn't the first time I had seen her act like this towards people she deemed beneath her. When I quit the next day, she told me I had broken her trust and that she was changing the locks to her house. I was just like, you never even gave me a key, bye. It was a demanding job in the first place, having to follow all of her systems and pretend her son had allergies. But I drew the line at watching her treat other people like crap. It took me a long time to stop being disgusted at her treatment of other people and feel some compassion for her. She was obviously dealing with some mental health issues. On the other hand, she was a truly toxic person, and she's not my problem anymore. I just hope she can rein in whatever anxiety, mental health issues she's dealing with for her kids' sake. Story 16. Quit Best Buy after 2 weeks. Just called up an hour or so before a shift and said, "Yay, not coming in ever again." Here's a list of crap from that 2-week time frame. Got barked at for taking a customer too close to a lift someone was using during prime hours on the sales floor. The lift was in the middle of an aisle, and we turned around as soon as we rounded the corner and saw the thing blocking it. Got barked at for cleaning extremely dusty shelves and TVs at 9 in the morning because there are customers in the department. There was one on the other side of the department, and my coworker was already attending to them. Was consistently sent to my 30-minute lunch 3 hours into my 8-hour shift. That was also the only break allowed. Got barked at by supervisor after selling $3.5K worth of stuff to someone because I didn't tack on an extra $1K of useless crap and was accused of, quote, selling from my own pocket, which basically means selling based on what I could afford. Hammered daily about credit card sign-up goals. That's all we heard. Every 30-60 minutes, an update on how close to the daily store goal we were. Know how many signups I saw in my 2 weeks there? None. Not for lack of trying. LP guys would tell you over the walkie when someone walked into the department. That got annoying quick, compounded by the fact we were expected to go to them ASAP, chat, and hand them a little folder about our products. That's how management saw we were actually talking to people. I worked retail 3 years before going to Best Buy. The way they ran things was just bat crap insane compared to ways I had previously seen. Story 17. I worked for a large insurance company. Husband and I were adopting our son from China. I told my boss that I would only be given about 3 weeks' notice from the adoption agency of when I'd be traveling to China. Boss grumbled about it and daily would ask me, "Do you know when yet?" Sometimes he'd ask me multiple times a day. I finally got my travel dates. My boss arranged for a temp to take over my files while I was gone. I gave my boss and the temp my work email so that they could access my stuff. The company was paperless, so all the reports came in through email. I returned home from China with my son and take a few more weeks off to bond with him. A few days before I'm due to return to the office, I check my work email from home and discover that I had over 1,000 emails in my inbox, all unread. My boss and the temp said they forgot to check my emails. It took weeks to get all my work caught up, some of which involved me working until midnight or later from home. My boss also griped about having me be gone for a total of 6 weeks, even though women on maternity leave take 6 weeks off. Apparently, since my son wasn't biologically mine, I had no right to miss so much work. Yep, I quit about 2 months after I returned to work. F that. Story 18. I was the director of security for a year. I took the job knowing it was salaried and I'd probably be working more than 40 hours and not being compensated for it, especially during the holidays. How quickly that turned into being on call 24/7, 365. I routinely worked 60+ hours a week, often going 2 weeks straight without a day off. I'd get weekly midnight phone calls because a fire alarm was going off or some drunk dude broke in, power outages, car fires, etc. I was getting called at home all the time, often needing to go in. I dealt with it because that was part of the job. What started putting the nails in the coffin was the mall gem, who we'll call Kim. I knew what type of person Kim was when he bragged to me about driving a longtime employee to quit because she disagreed with him. Kim was a 5 feet 3 inches, 260 pounds chode of a human who thought he was king of the mall, and we were his peasants. He routinely called me up drunk off his ass, talking crap about my minority employees, made incredibly offensive remarks about my female employees, and wanted me to change incident reports that placed blame on him or the property for incompetence. When I started pushing back against him, he started making up lies, how I hadn't showed up to work and that I was harassing my employees. The company I worked for, I was a security contractor, and he was my client, did their investigation. The cameras showed me showing up and leaving, and every one of my employees laughed when asked if I was harassing them. Now for the final nail in the coffin. I hadn't had a day off in 4 weeks, leading up to the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I took the day off knowing the holiday season was right around the corner and wanted a day to do nothing. I should add I was ordered to work on Thanksgiving. At 9 a.m. I get a phone call from Kim about an emergency meeting and I needed to report to work. I lost my crap. My wife comes upstairs asking me what's wrong. I explain. She quickly runs downstairs. She comes back, hands me an empty cardboard box and says, "I'm not telling you to quit, but here are a couple empty boxes." Needless to say, I took the hint. At about 11 a.m., I finally get to my office. Kim calls me screaming that I better be in my office. My response, "I am in my office, but I'm cleaning it out, I quit," and hung up on him. I said my goodbyes to my employees and went looking to confront Kim, but he was nowhere to be found. After I left, I found out Kim hid in his truck because he was afraid I was going to confront him. Normally, a director of security quitting the day before Thanksgiving would be spiteful enough. Remember that sexual harassment complaint Kim made against me? Well, guess who was trespassed? From one of the bars on mall property for harassing bartenders, including inappropriate touching. That's right, good old Kim. I had friends who worked at this bar and they all gave me the details a couple days after I quit. I sent an email to his boss documenting Kim's actions. He was fired 3 days later. Story 19. Worked a crafty sales job and was promised I could have a day off for my friend's wedding when I started. Creepy manager refused to let me switch my shift when the day came. When I moved to a small town, I had a hard time finding a job. I ended up working in a sales position. Within the first month I had started working, I had asked to keep a particular day free for a friend's wedding. From the start, there were issues. The manager was this creepy guy in his mid-30s who would hit on every young girl who came into the shop and act inappropriately with my younger female coworker. He even said to me that he couldn't joke with me that way because I had a fiance. There was no talking to the boss about anything because she was even weirder. She used the manager like her personal errand boy, and he took liberties, like taking cash advances without permission from the till. The manager said it would be no problem. When I had worked long enough to make commissions, the manager would step into my sales, telling the customer I was still in training, and essentially steal my commission. The other girls who worked there said he did the same thing to them on occasion. I eventually snapped and called him out on it, and the crazy ducker yelled in my face about it. I'll admit I raised my voice as well. When it came time for my friend's wedding, I was scheduled for that day. When I reminded him about it, he said, "Too bad." So I asked another coworker if we could switch shifts, and she was okay with it. But when we brought it to him, he refused to allow it. So I worked my last shift the day before the wedding. Then I emailed the boss and told her I was giving in my immediate notice. I had even arranged for my other coworker to cover my shift as to not leave them in a bind, because I'm nice like that. He dared show up at my house to demand to know why I had quit. My fiance told him to get lost. The best part was the week before, a couple ladies who worked at our local municipality had come in to hook up their phones, and both noted I seemed to be a wasted talent there and gave me their number. I went to work for the local government office after story 20. I just left a job last month selling cable door to door. I won't give the name of the company, but it rhymes with rectum. Now, the job itself wasn't bad. I'm a good salesperson, and being outside beats being stuck in an office, hands down. But management were idiots. They would continually pressure the reps to work Saturdays, which are unpaid since we're salary. Now, keep in mind, Saturdays are not required from us. HR had already ruled that OT was optional, but that didn't stop management from pestering us daily to the point of harassment. We would get emails and phone calls daily asking us to commit in writing to Saturday work. It would come up in every meeting. One of my coworkers was invited to sit in a management call where they referred to those who refused to work out were called lazy and making excuses. They even tried to write it in my monthly performance review that I would commit 4 hours every Saturday. I told my supervisor to delete that line or I wouldn't sign the review. The final straw came in the last week of March during OUT monthly kickoff meeting. There, we all gathered in person for 2 hours, and both the GM and director lectured us on how we need to put in more effort and show commitment instead of compliance. Their tone and body language made very clear they were disdainful of people refusing to work OT. They didn't care that we had lives outside of the company. I knew then that I had to leave. I didn't bail immediately. I wanted to make sure everything was accounted for, and I didn't make the mistakes I made with Comcast. So I started emailing HR about my time off accruals. I got an email confirmation that all my vacation time gets paid out to me if I quit and healthcare stays current until the end of the month I quit in. This is important because I had close to 70 hours of vacation time owed to me paid at time and a half. That alone is almost $3K. I forwarded those emails to my Gmail. I used up all my personal and sick time. Then I timed it so I knew I would get one last full paycheck before Give IBG official 2 weeks. This was on April 7th, so my last day would have been the 21st. I go into the office on April 8th, and management agrees in writing to pay out to the 21st plus expenses. I walk away with another 2K salary and 3 weeks of health care. Between all this money and what I have in the bank, I could have gone 6 months without a job. Obviously, I didn't want to do that, so I immediately started interviewing. I had a job offer within a week with a $1,000 sign on bonus story 21. I had been with the company for about 6 years working as a project manager. Now I didn't come in as a PM, but worked my way up from their call center through promotion. I became a PM when they needed someone who had both system design and documentation experience I had, as well as knew our systems inside and out. About halfway through the project, they hired a PM fresh out of college and asked me to train her. I was fine with this, but over the course of time, I found out they hired her for 15 hours more than me when they had told me 1 year prior that what they were paying me was the absolute max. Now at this point, I had several successful projects already under my belt, had changed our processes and how the development was going, because prior to bringing me on board, the project had stalled. It was the first time in 2 years since they started trying to develop that the project was actually meeting deadline. Since it was also about time for my annual, I went to my boss and got that out of the way and got the usual glowing review. I, as such, requested an 18-year raise as I had more than proven to be capable and was shouldering most of the project development as well as the training of the college kid. He took my request to HR and they refused, citing that because I was an internal promotion and not hired specifically as a PM, that they couldn't possibly pay me more than what they currently were. I reminded them that not only had I vastly exceeded all expectation, but was the one doing the lion's share of the work as well as training someone who was being paid significantly more than me. It was completely unreasonable to tell me I'm not worth more than the person they just hired with no experience to speak of. They refused. I walked out that day. My boss was beside himself, begging me to come back. I said, sorry, I refuse to be taken advantage of. 2 weeks went by and things started to absolutely fall apart as I was the one running the show for all development teams, most of which were outsourced. HR had the nerve to contact me around that time and offered me a further insulting $1,200 a year raise, of which I declined and stated, at this point, you aren't getting me back for less than $25K a year over what I made. That is the market rate for someone with my skills, and I've already got 2 pending offers. They refused, and I took a job making $22K more than I made there. 2 months later, heads started rolling, and I heard the entire HR department got gutted for pulling that same crap on a ton of people. Turns out, the company was banking on that software being complete as they were showcasing it to other companies in a bid to sell the company. They never got the project back on schedule, and the company ended up taking about half the buyout they were originally being offered. Story 22 was hired to do facility maintenance, set up machines for different operations, QA operators work, do basic machine programming, and train new operators on any machine in the facility. Ended up being promised a raise for 9 months straight. Was ultimately told it wasn't in the budget. When I inquired about when my pay bump would be coming, but was shown a signed employment contract attempt to hire, had signed that day, promising the pay rate I'd been asking for. I also trained that guy, so major kick in the teeth for me. That combined with being put on the most brain-dead machine possible for 4 months straight due to insane turnover rate caused by the most incompetent and unprofessional operations manager I've ever met, is what ultimately led to me sending an immediately effective resignation notice at 5 p.m. on a Friday. I was never late, never written up, and regularly pulled weekend overtime to fix down machines to keep production intact. Overall, I found out I was only being paid about 60% of what I was worth at best. Story 23, working for Waffle House as a floater manager, meaning I covered anything for the restaurant manager or cooks, waitresses. Not only cooking and waiting tables, but doing inventories, stock order, bank runs, managing the tills, you name it. The job was brutal. 16 HRs a day, 14 or more days at a time before a day off, then right back at it for another 2 weeks or more. I usually got stuck working third shift plus first shift, which, as anyone knows, means the bar crowd on weekends, which made it 10x worse, plus the morning rush the next day. Also had to work every holiday. Being on my feet all the time, restaurant work made me not want to eat. So I'd lost a drastic amount of weight and was burning out hard. One day I'm on the phone with my dad and we have the following conversation about it. Dad, sounds like you need to get out of there and find another job. You can stay here at home until you do. Me. Okay, I'll put in my 2 weeks. Dad, why? You gonna use them for a reference later? Me. Well, no. That was it. I'd been asking for some day shifts for a long time, not a night person either. So I figured I'd look at the schedule and see where I was slotted to work for the next week. Sure as crap, they put me on third shift all week. Went out to my car, grabbed my uniforms, and told the smiling idiot of a manager, thanks, but no thanks, I quit. Thanks. Good luck covering this shift. Best part, as I was walking back to my car, the district manager and his boss, the area manager, were walking in. I stopped to talk to them, and they asked the standard, how you doing today? Having just quit and having a huge burden just lifted from my shoulders, I answered honestly, I'm doing great. Best day of my life. They smiled, I waved, and got in my car and left. I can only imagine their reactions when they got inside and found out I'd just quit, leaving the restaurant manager to cover third shift himself since no one else was available, which also meant the district manager had to cover day shift since this guy now had to work third best day ever. Story 24. So here it goes. Last year I worked for a moving company, pretty big name, in LA County. Needless to say, we saw the best of the best and the worst of the worst. Helped Bob Harper move, one of the trainers on The Biggest Loser. He helped us pack and move almost everything and tipped each of us $200 at the end of the day. There were 5 people. Great guy. Anyway, arriving at a job and the notes say, may have difficulty moving through apartment, which typically meant furniture and things are messy simply because they are moving. No big deal. Not our first rodeo. We show up and we're greeted with this horrendous smell. The only thing I could equate it to is that fresh skunk spray smell. We start walking through the house and realize we can't see the floor. I mean, we are at least a foot from the ground, stepping on miscellaneous crap. Hoarders. With our company, we had the leisure of being able to call in and say the apartment isn't up to working condition. Hoarders fall under the category, but if we saw spiders, rodents, we could call it in and leave the site without repercussion. It had been a really slow month for our branch, and after calling our supervisor and arguing for 20 minutes, they advised we needed to tough this one out for the sake of our jobs. The 3 of us calmly took some deep breaths and got to work. About 30 minutes in, I can hardly stand the smell anymore. I'm gagging just being in the house. We go to move an old nightstand and a ducking rat the size of a 3-month-old cat scurried away. We dropped the nightstand, told our other coworker, and we walked out. The customers were furious because we were being babies and couldn't handle a little mess to clean up. Our supervisor called within minutes of us driving off and said, if we don't go back, we are fired. We all decided to pull over, turn the truck off, lock the keys in the car, and get Ubers home. We figured since we were being treated so crafty, we'd do the same, hopefully leading to them having to the job. It was 8 p.m. at this point. We clock in at 6 a.m. So everyone's gone, except the supervisors, waiting for us to get back. We got word the next day from coworkers that the supervisors didn't do the job because the house was too ducked, never got an offer or an apology for our job back either. Story 25. I did call support for Comcast. Do I need to actually explain this? I came across a job I wanted on Indeed.com and saw it as the only glimmer of light in the otherwise bleak and dreary perpetual storm close of disappointment and regret that is Comcast. Called the attendance line because my supervisor wasn't in that day, and this is the exact conversation. Hey, I'm scheduled, gave them 48-hour notice, and I'm calling to let you know that I no longer wish to be employed by our company. I will not be in attendance on that day and want you to have a chance to get that scheduled accordingly. You're going to have to discuss that with your supervisor. Yeah, I'll do that. But in the meantime, your job is to manage the attendance of scheduled workers, correct? Well, yeah, but we don't deal with people quitting. You need to tell your supervisor. Yeah. Yes, Kyle. It's Kyle, right? All right, Kyle. So if I was calling in sick, you would be the person to talk to, right? Yes. Okay. Now, stick with me here. You will then take this attendance information and enter it into whatever you use and make it known to the relevant staff that you, I'm in her computer, will not be at work today. Well, yeah, that's if you're sick, but you said you're quitting. All right, Kyle, different plan. I'm gonna be sick forever, okay? Does that work for you? I'm sick today, I'm sick tomorrow, I'm sick every day for the next, 20 years. Mark that down however you normally would, and have a great day. And if anyone wants to know why I'm quitting, you can go ahead and use this very call as an example. I immediately felt like a world of freedom and happiness just opened up to me. I spent that day meticulously rewriting my resume, CV, references, and anything else to specifically tailor it to this job I wanted. I was very fortunate to get the potion, and I honest to God love this job. I love the job, the people, the environment, literally everything about it. I seriously am hard-pressed to find a good, legitimate complaint about any aspect of my current job. Keep the hope alive, people. Keep Indeed and Monster bookmarked and check them daily. Just apply for craps and giggles if you have to. It gets so easy to get stuck in a crap job. The stress of the crap job makes the stress of finding another job seem that much more difficult. Story 26. I was a delivery driver for a major auto parts store. Specifically, I delivered store-to-store transfers from the main location in the district. It was technically part-time, but I think the least amount of hours I had scheduled per week was 32. I worked closer to 50 most weeks. But then 1 week out of a month, I'd only work 3 days, so could get around being forced to bump me to full-time. We had different routes, and each route did 3 runs per day, except the longest one, which went way out into the boonies about an hour away from the main store, if you went straight there. When you got back from your first run, which was usually around 10 a.m., you had to take lunch. No choice. After that, you'd take your second run, then come back, have to stand around for 45 minutes while they got the final run ready, and then take that. We weren't allowed to leave the store or sit down or eat during that time either. By the time you got back to the store to go home, it was between 7 and 8 p.m. and you started at 8 a.m. 12-hour shifts aren't a huge deal, but when it's 8 p.m. and you haven't eaten since 10 a.m., you're ducking starving, and we weren't allowed to stop to eat or eat our own food in the vehicles under any circumstances. On the first 2 runs of the day, we took returns back to the main store from the other stores, so we had to stop at every store. On the 3rd run, we didn't take returns. So if we didn't have anything to drop off at that store, it was a complete waste of time going there. Myself and most of the other drivers expressed out dissatisfaction with the way the 3rd run was handled, and our store changed it so that we didn't have to stop at a store for the 3rd run unless we had something to drop off. It was great for about a month. Getting home at 6:30 or so was a massive improvement. Then out of nowhere, they changed their minds and we had to stop at all the stores again. I didn't bother coming back after the day that was announced. Went to school instead. The job itself was fine, but I'm a frequent eater. Instead of eating a big meal and being fine all day, I eat smaller portions every few hours. I've tried to have larger meals, but I just can't do it. I feel awful if I eat too much. Story 27. In between engineering jobs, I worked doing clerical work for a trucking company that my father drove for. Pay wasn't great, but it was better than most other jobs I could pick up quickly, and I was desperate. The hours were 5 p.m., 11 p.m. every weekday, so I tried to pick up a second part-time job during the day to make ends meet at that time. For a long time, I actually enjoyed working at the trucking company. The drivers were a weird combination of creepy and nice, and the girl who worked with me seemed cool enough. Then things started going downhill quickly when one of the drivers started making extremely inappropriate sexual comments to me, and I reported him. Instantly, I became everyone's enemy there, even the other girl, and the night shift manager went out of his way to nitpick everything I did around the office, which my work was excellent, BTW, while the other girl fooled around on Snapchat and flirted with the outbound supervisor. But I didn't quit. I just picked up a second job at a warehouse, working the morning shift during the holiday rush. That job told me I'd be working 3 10-hour shifts a week, 60-hour weeks. Perfect, right? Wrong. First week on the job, there was Black Friday week, so instead of 3 10s, all of us were scheduled for 6 12-hour shifts. That means from 4:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. I was at the warehouse job, which I loved, and 5 to 11 p.m. I was at the trucking company. This lasted all of 3 days. My 3rd day of doing 18-hour days, I came in 10 minutes late to the job at the trucking company. Night manager was on my case already. I just smiled and got to work. Later on, one of the creepier drivers, who definitely had a crush on me, brought me back a coffee and kept talking to me while I was doing work. After 2 minutes of me nodding politely and responding while focusing on my work, the manager shooed the driver away, screaming at him for stealing time. I felt a little bad even though it wasn't my fault, and me being me, apologized, expecting stupidly to be reassured that I wasn't forcing this man to talk to me. Instead, I got called an escort and a distraction. That night was my last night working there. Never gave any notice. Story 28. Well, I tried to give my 2 weeks, but they decided to pay me 2 weeks severance up front and kick me out the door. To this day, I don't know if I was fired or not. It was a bank. A few factors led to me quitting. I had been held hostage, I was a teller, a few days prior, and was specifically told not to call the cops over it. I had a cat illegally living with me in an apartment, and I wanted her to be free to roam. So I sought a job in another city, terrible pay, a super strict, no cell phone policy, which wouldn't especially irritate me except that the bank was inside a Walmart, which meant that if managers saw you in Greater Walmart with your uniform on your cell, you could be written up super unreasonable sales goals. It was in a small town, and there's just only so big a customer base for new bank accounts. Plus, they wouldn't allow us to do any outside prospecting. So they literally wanted us to stop Walmart customers as they passed us and hawk our bank accounts. Yeah, great public brand. Manager had get Justin Timberlake circa 2001 hair regularly ducked over poor people by encouraging them to sign up for crap they didn't need and would ultimately destroy their credit. Anyway, when I got a call from my now boss that I'd gotten my current job while at my old job, I answered my cell phone in the vault. I literally did not care anymore. And since I couldn't shriek with joy, I closed myself in the vault and did a happy dance. I think I licked the door. I'd pay to see that camera footage. But yes, I composed a respectful 2 weeks email, went home for the weekend, came in on Monday at my scheduled time, and my branch manager, actually a fairly nice lady, it was the regional that sucked and had bad hair, said they just decided to pay me out and to go home. So I turned in my uniform shirt, had a tank on underneath, and just sort of aimlessly wandered Walmart on the phone with my mom for an hour, shopping for household goods, trying to figure out how I was going to move to a new city 30 miles away in an approximate 2-week time span. I made it work though, got a second cat, I'm now more or less content. Though I do want to go back to school. Story 29. I was working as a postie in Australia around 1990. We started work at 5:30 a.m., sorted the mail, then walked out to deliver it. Once your mail was delivered, you were free to go home. A lot of the guys were very lazy and their beats were arranged to finish at the pub on the corner opposite the post office. They would then go in there and rack up overtime while claiming to be out delivering mail when in fact they were getting pissed. Sometimes the postmaster would try to sneak over to the pub to see if he could catch any of his blokes in there. The barman would give them the alarm because they had their backs to the doors, drinking away, and they would go hide in the toilets till he went away again. Anyway, being young and interested in fitness at that time, I started jogging around my walking beat and delivering mail. There were several times that I finished for the day before 9 a.m. and once at around 8 a.m. And that meant all my houses got their mail early too, of course. They were very happy about this. I remember one woman complimenting me about it, because before me they wouldn't get it till the afternoon. Well, after a couple of months of this, the postmaster came and told me, because you've been finishing faster than the other guys, we've decided your run isn't big enough, and we're gonna give you some of their streets. So, you're gonna penalize your best worker, me, and reward the lazy ducks who are racking up fake overtime in the pub? No thanks. I was in his office while he was telling me this. Once he finished, I then resigned immediately. He was still trying to talk me into staying as I walked out. As it happened, my brother had gotten a job with a national retailer a year ago and been asking me to join. I walked out of the old job and was in a new one by Friday, and I wound up staying there for almost 13 years. Story 30. I found a job working for a medical school's neurosurgery department. This was the academic department, not the clinic department, which is important because the academic department doesn't have anything to do with surgeries or patient care. It was strictly the office that did the research and lecture scheduling, along with anything related to the school side of things. The job I got hired for was editorial consultant, which meant that I would be editing and formatting research papers for publication. There was also some website work and general office duties. But within my first 2 weeks, they added the workload of 2 other positions they lost and refused to hire for. So I was doing the workload of 3 people. This now included department event planning, not simple office parties, but big black tie fundraising conferences for hundreds of people with corporate sponsorship, international travel, events that are full-time jobs to plan, making presentations, scheduling publishing meetings with foreign companies for books deals, and basically any other projects too big for the secretary to handle. My job responsibilities were now listed in 3 separate 1-inch thick binders. All this had turned what was supposed to be a 40-hour work week into 80-90 hours of work per week. Everyone else in the office was constantly stressed out. Secretaries were taking their lunches to cry in closets. The department head, chief of surgery for that department, was internationally renowned and an excellent surgeon, but was a complete who had no idea how to manage a department. One job they sprung on me was to involve phone call follow-ups with patient care post-surgery. Remember, I did not work in the hospital section of the medical school. I worked in a different building. I had no training for patient care. I sure as hell wasn't about to assume the liability of communicating info from patients to medical staff. I told the department that it was out of the scope of my job. A few weeks later, I got called in for an impromptu performance review. The review basically said that I was performing well below expectations. I'd worked many jobs, and I'd never received a poor review in my life. I know my work ethic, and I'm a very competent person. I quit on the spot. Drove down the street to a music store my friend owned and got a job that same day. Half the pay, but far happier. Story 31. Didn't quit on short notice, but I did quit almost purely out of spite. I worked for a company of about 30 people for 9 years. I was the 5th longest tenured employee, and the owner forgot I existed. To make a short story long, the owner would throw these really nice Christmas parties at really trendy places where he would pay for everything and hand out bonuses during a super awkward presentation. The presentation would take place after a couple of hours of drinking, at which point he would gather the entire company and began calling up specific departments and talk about what they had accomplished during the past year. So he goes through the entire company and forgets 3 of us. We're all single-person departments, and he's had quite a bit to drink. He's about to finish up, and the VP leans in and lets him know she still has 3 bonus checks. So he calls the other 2 up, talks about them, and then once again begins to finish his drunk speech. Cue the VP again. He looks up at me, calls my name, says my job description, hands me my check, and that's it. Most of the other employees look at me like they want to go crawl under a table for me. He had more to say about the warehouse guys that had only been employed for like 6 months. The owner and I were never friends, but I never thought there was any animosity there. My bonus was half of what it was the previous couple of years. Meanwhile, everyone else's had gone up. I later learned the owner thought I made too much money for my position and didn't have the balls to talk about it. I began looking for a new job in the new year and had one by March. When I told him I was quitting, he had completely dumbfounded look on his face and just said, okay. No questions, no comments, just okay. Story 32. I loved my job. I targeted this job and worked hard to get this job. It was at a major healthcare insurance provider. I worked for a lady Karen. She was the mother, Karen of all Karens. She managed to make a staff of 26 people quit in 1 year because of her BS. Our HR department didn't have a backbone, although numerous complaints had been made against the boss lady. HR was afraid to do anything because she was an RN and the director of the department who happened to marry a doctor who ran another department and was also on the board of directors. The boss lady would talk down to one of my co-worker, an attorney, and told her to shut up all the time. It wasn't her time to talk. I've seen this boss lady reduce her mangers to tears, and I've seen them gone home for the day. My final straw was watching the department staff leave and or quit 2 by 2. When the boss lady said to me, in a department meeting, I need you to just sit down, shut up, and take minutes, I knew I was going to quit. I found out that my co-worker attorney was also quitting, and we decided to quit on the same day, thinking it would make an impact since we were close to the last of the staff left in the department. I wrote a powerful exist statement. Unfortunately, it didn't help. Story 33. I'd been feeling depressed and miserable. One early-ass morning, I just snapped. I got sent home to shave at 6 a.m., despite having shaved the day before. No car, freezing December morning. While I walked, I realized, this ducking sucks. I can do better than this. So I turned in my uniform when I got back, found a job with nearly double the pay, with more hours requiring half the effort. Story 34. Being passed over for a change of shifts after 2 years and 6 months of requesting it. Graveyard will really mess with your life, and seeing multiple new hires get day and swing pissed me off to no end. So I grabbed a case of beer, wrote a really sarcastic note about not being Dracula and how I deserved to see the sun, taped it to the door, and shoved the key through the crack after locking up. So be kind to your local convenience store cashier, because while you sleep, they stand there under the fluorescent lights all night, dealing with tweakers, drunks, addict, and weirdos. Story 35. I was working in a grocery store for several years. The last year and a half, it was like they stopped bothering to try and train anyone else to do anything extra because it was just expected that I could handle it. On top of being a cashier, I was expected to cover the store's coffee bar, while the morning person went to lunch, took grocery orders over the phone, because some people apparently don't like using the store's online order form. Getting the grocery orders together, light stock work, training new cashiers, you get the idea. More than once, I either was given my break at the last possible minute, in one case, literally an hour before I was scheduled to leave, or because I was at the coffee bar all day because the person scheduled there called out, I was just sent home early since there was no one to relieve me because the managers didn't want to be back there for a whole half hour. No extra pay for all that. Just an occasional good job followed by more work. But I was eventually given an opportunity to leave with a safety net. The better half and I were buying a house well away from the store, and he gave me permission to quit whenever I wanted. Finances were good enough to where I could be out of work for a while. I wanted to make it hurt, though. Years of being treated like a slave made me bitter as hell. I gave my 2 weeks notice, knowing that my last day would be right before a big local holiday weekend when they would need all hands on deck. And no, during that time, they did not bother training anyone else to do that extra stuff. The best part is that they were likely blissfully unaware of just how badly they were screwed until the new schedule came out that same day, and they didn't have anyone else to do all that extra stuff that they relied on me for. Story 36. My old job was miserable. My boss was a complete a-hole who would get crafty with everyone over minor mistakes. On my first day there, he had me go with him to the other shop he had, not to check it out or learn anything, but to chew a guy's ass for doing some drilling slightly wrong. He was the owner of the company, so there was basically no recourse, and everyone just endured it. I had just given him a stack of prints to review. He had put it off for a couple months. I was still new, so he wanted to check everything I did, despite the fact that people who had been there for years were sending things out wrong, and the job was incredibly behind. He comes back in with 2 nearly identical, but not quite drawings, tosses them onto my keyboard in front of me and asks if I have a vision problem because these are the same. I point out the difference. He gets quiet, I find a new job that week and put in a whopping 4-day notice. I took a raise, got rid of the insane overtime I was working, and took a job that's become my career. As for him, last I heard he had a massive stroke shortly after being in a major car accident and is basically on death's door. Story 37. It was so stupid. I worked in the part of a newspaper plant that was responsible for those crafty marketing inserts. They installed a used machine whose sole purpose was to print addresses on junk mail postcards. He promoted me to being in charge of running the machine, an extra 4 hours of work a week starting at 6 a.m. to hand feed the machine, collect, strap, and pack several thousands of these crafty cards. Every single shift, the machine was somehow out of ink. I had to call my supervisor, wait for him to come in, unlock the office, and change the ink. He would come over and switch at the cartridges, watch as a few cards come out that met his approval, and left every Sunday. Faintly printed cards had to be rerun, and every shift was way longer than the time allotted to me. After weeks of frustration, he gave me a key and taught me how to replace the cartridges myself. That's when I learned there were never any new ink cartridges. He was saving the old cartridges, wetting them down, and reinstalling them over and over. One morning I had less time, schedule cut down because the frequent downtime of the machine led to me being there an hour or 2 longer than I should every week, and had double the work to do because he had taken on new batches that he said that he would run before leaving for the weekend, and they weren't even started. I tested, dampened, and swore at every ink cartridge in the place, and they were all completely dead. I called him to find out what to do about them all being totally empty, and he yelled that he was tired of getting called at 6 a.m. every Sunday and to figure it out myself. So I turned off the machine, left the key on his desk, and went back home to bed. Duck you, Peter. Story 38. The shop I was working at was unionizing, and management was not okay with that. Rather than address any of the issues that were leading to that, they opted to double down on them. I guess in some misguided attempt to make us all respect their authority. All it did was make sure literally everyone voted union. Shortly before the vote, they decided to crack down on stealing hours and being late. I was used as an example and given a suspension for constant and pervasive tardiness. After reviewing my time cards, it turns out that my constant tardiness meant that over a 1-month period, I was a combined total of 4 minutes late. I guess the couple hours of unpaid overtime, also did during that month, didn't count for anything. Due to the crafty conditions there, I had already been looking for new work, and I got a call on my way home asking if I could come in for a day at one of the places I had applied. I said yes and started my new job the next day. The day my suspension ended, I waited till my coffee break at the new job, an hour and a half after I should have been at the old job, then called them to quit. The conversation went along the lines of, "Old job, where the hell are you? Didn't you learn your lesson from that suspension?" Me: "Oh yeah, thanks for those days off actually. I used them to get a new job. I'm just on my coffee break now. Anyways, I'm quitting, so I'll buy on Tuesday to grab my last paycheck. See you then." It was probably one of the most satisfying conversations I'd ever had. I had a sweet new job that literally doubled my wage, and they lost their head fabricator and only ticketed welder with no notice. Story 39. So about 2 weeks before the incident, I was a busser who was formerly a dishwasher. So the dishwasher had quit, and my boss asked me to fill in as a dishwasher until he found someone else. Even though I hated dishwashing and my boss was aware of this, I reluctantly agreed, and that 1 week was a nightmare. Luckily, spring break was ending, so I could no longer work during the week since I go to college, so I told him this. When he found a new dishwasher, he assured me I wouldn't have to dishwash again, and he appreciated how I helped him out. 2 weeks of purely bussing and the dishwasher quits. I go into work and see 2 other bussers, but no dishwasher. The kitchen lets me know that I have to dishwash today, but they will take care of the kitchen, and I just have to deal with the floor. I figure I can handle that. Then my boss calls to apologize, and he tells me that there's no need for the chefs to clean since he already has 2 bussers on the floor and that I can handle it. I say, okay, then hang up. I go into the kitchen to wash dishes, then I just stare at them for a while. I start thinking, if this is happening now, what's stopping him from making new dishwash again? The answer is nothing. The worst part is, he could have easily asked another busser to dishwash, but instead, he asked me, despise knowing my feelings. When I realize all this, I hear the chef yelling at me, telling me to go on my lunch break, and I realize I do want a break, a permanent break. So I tell him I quit and walked out. I called up my boss, telling him I quit, and I've never been happier than I am now. Story 40. I worked at a Taco Bell in high school for 1.5 years. I was Employee of the Month 9 times. It got to the point where they just gave me a pretty large raise for my age and removed me from EOTM consideration. A new manager with a serious attitude problem hated me for some reason. I had a day I called in sick, but was convinced to at least come in for pre-opening morning stuff just to get the store on its feet. The store opens at 10 a.m., at which point Karen manager and a few staff are scheduled to start, which is when I left. By the time I got home, I had a voicemail on our answering machine with this Karen screaming, saying I'm fired, etc., for job abandonment. I called the regional manager who gave me my job back instantly. My next shift, we had a pretty big meeting with the regional manager, store manager, and the Karen manager. This lady got blasted in as professional of a way as possible, and it was glorious. The meeting ends with the big dog managers getting this lady to apologize to me, and she can just barely get it out without her head exploding. They asked if I had anything to add. I quit. Story 41, I was a dancer, the adult kind. My girlfriend at the time, who lived with me, worked at the same club as I. I had a kidney, urinary tract, and chest infection all at once, and had been off work for nearly 3 weeks. I had been to hospital after cracking my own rib from coughing and popping a vein out of place in my groin, and had been providing my manager with medical certificates. One night, we were both told our shifts that evening were compulsory. I tried my best to get ready for the shift, despite the pain, but my girlfriend had come down with a bowel issue that had her bleeding from her ass. She took the night off, only to be told, I've had tofu off for 3 weeks. If one of you doesn't show up tonight, you're both fired. I was on my way, collected my lingerie from my locker, and texted my manager on my way back at saying, hey, I won't be coming back again, all the best. Story 42. I've never really quit a job out of spite, mostly because they didn't end up paying what they promised. But here's a story about the opposite. I was working as a machine mechanic. I didn't hate the work, but I really hated my boss. It wasn't just me who hated him. Literally no one in the building could stand him. To this day, I think that was a technique of his to get better production out of us. Get all the employees to bond together over commonality. I applied for a few jobs, had a few interviews to get out. Then one day I came to a realization. If I quit this job because I hate it, I'll just carry that attitude into my next one, wash, rinse, repeat. Instead of leaving that job, I decided to build a purpose and have a goal to improve my situation and not just move to the next situation I can find. From that day forward, I busted my ass, working harder than the day before it, challenging myself every day. I was working for me, not for him. I loved it. Eventually, I decided to go back to school. The following week, my boss asked if I wanted to be trained for a higher position. I said yes. The next week, I proposed going part-time while I went back to school. By that point, I didn't give a duck about him, the job, whatever, it was about me. He told me he didn't have a part-time spot open, and if a future employer calls in, he can't say anything bad about me. But he would if he legally could. This coming from the guy who was thrilled by my work and wanted to promote me. He was laid off less than 6 months later due to budget cuts. Story 43. At my old job, there was a culture of cliques, very reminiscent of school. When I fit in with the cool people there, the job was good and I got treated very well. When I wanted to stop slacking off and actually just get on with my job, go home and not adhere to the social side of things particularly, I started to get phased out. The final nail in the coffin for me was when I took my boss aside and explained how over the weekend I had just found out the news that my dad has a form of untreatable cancer. And I apologize if my mood is a bit low or I seem distracted for a few days while my brain processes everything. She was just like, fair enough, no offering of sympathy or anything like that, and I got back to work. A couple days later, one of the popular girls turned up for work in tears because she had split up with her boyfriend of 6 months. My boss sent her home and gave her compassionate leave, a fully paid week off. What makes me bitter is nothing of the sort was offered to me. I doubt I would have taken it, but still. And I found the whole thing a bit distasteful. This was among other instances, for example, my boss actually telling me once she was concerned because my face didn't fit in here, etc., got up and left on my birthday and never looked back. Story 44. I was a building manager for 3 years and was only given a $1 raise. We had 2 employees leave who were never replaced. I was told to clean the floors with cold water and no soap, yet I was constantly reprimanded for not cleaning thoroughly enough. I would work completely alone due to understaffing, and the shifts would be scheduled 8 to 10 hours, but they averaged 12 to 14. But the final nail in the coffin was me working a 16-hour shift alone when I was scheduled for 8. I was a building manager during events, so I couldn't just leave. The next morning, I threw my keys on my boss's desk and walked out. I had put in my 2 weeks notice, but didn't even make it a week. Story 45. I received an email mid-stay asking to call to discuss something urgent and time-sensitive. This was a little worrisome, as generally speaking, emails exist to establish consistency, accountability, communication, and the like. I called nonetheless an hour or so later. Once on the call and pleasantries were exchanged, I was asked to schedule a select percentage of employees on a specific day. What made this odd is that it was passed when internal policy dictated schedules be published, but prior to when our area of governance legally allowed for a worker's change to schedule. I asked for the reasoning behind the change and was told I would be filled in at a later date. And when asked best practices for the sudden change in informing affected workers, I was told to stand down and to await further instructions. It wasn't until a few hours later, unnerved, that I realized that employees that didn't appear for that shift as scheduled wouldn't be entitled to a specific statutory pay. I later confirmed this with 2 more tenured colleagues as having occurred many years ago when liquidity was an issue and the communications were being conducted via phone to avoid any paper trail. Integrity and conscience didn't allow for me to take that route, so I created a memorandum around the conversation and informed the workers as appropriate. Needless to say, my directors were not pleased, and so began the souring. I didn't necessarily quit as immediately as some others in this thread have done, and I commend you, but with the guidance of my legal counsel, we did negotiate my exit in as controlled a manner as possible. Story 46. Not so much quit out of spite, but just not go back out of spite. Was working at a fast food place in HS. The place was a badly managed crap show, but nothing quite bad enough to drive me off. Management had a book where people could request time off, but I don't think they ever bothered to look in it. I'd requested a day off to go on a school trip and came back to find out I'd been scheduled that day and they'd wrote me up as a no-call, no-show. Later that year, I was scheduled to have some major surgery. This had been planned and worked up to for literally years in advance. As soon as I knew the exact date, about 4 months before the actual procedure, I let management know and kept reminding them on a regular basis up until the final day. I'll bet you can guess what happened. Management called while I was being prepped for surgery, claiming I'd been scheduled that day. My dad answered and explained what was going on, and the manager was absolutely shocked because she had no idea. He laughed at her and hung up. I never went back. Story 47. 2 jobs I have quit in my life by walking out. First, I worked as banquet chef in a hotel. Pretty chill environment, unionized, great hours, seeing as though I was in school. But the head chef was gross AF. I'm all for using products wisely and towards their end of shelf life. But one day, we are serving the lunch buffet as usual, and we run out of fish. Can't find any anywhere. Chef finds a box of fish somewhere. I open it, and I'm blown away by this scent so vile. I tell him I refuse to use this and can make a different dish for the buffet. He says no, just wash it off. I tell him Jay refused to use it and it is against my better judgment, and that I'll walk out if it doesn't go in the trash. I walk away because I'm heated. I see him go to wash it off and use it. I just clock out and never come back. Not worth my integrity. Second, sexist-ass chef always with crap jokes. Whatever ill make them. I live 5 minutes away. I, at this time, already have a great job as a nutrition educator, so I'm just doing this on the side for extra cash. I get my period between shifts. I'm already fed up with this job. We are 1 man short already. I tell the head chef I got to run home, take a quick shower, and be back in less than an hour. He tells me to just deal with it. Use some toilet paper. I remove my apron, punch out, and tell him good luck without 2 chefs. We had 200 price reservations that night. Not a hint of empathy from me. Story 48. I worked in the kitchen of a popular pub chain in the UK over the summer when I was a student. It wasn't great work, but I got paid. After summer, I asked for a transfer to the pub of the same chain in my university city. It went through and I got given a kitchen close shift as my first shift. I turn up and there's 1 other person there, and it's their first day working for the company. The bar manager comes up and asks me to train them and complete the close, full kitchen clean and restock for next day. Now I had done this plenty in my previous pub, but I was new to this kitchen and didn't know where half the stuff was, and the equipment was totally different. I do what I can while trying to give the new girl some easier tasks. It gets to 1 a.m. and I think we are done. The bar manager comes up and goes ape crap at stuff I'd missed, because it was not something we had in our pub. I just laughed and told him to fix it then and just left. Went back to my old pub and they took me back on, and I just worked weekends. Story 49. This was about 20 years ago, but I was a line cook at a chain restaurant. I was 19 years old. Came into work to find that one cook had called in sick, and the other I was supposed to be with got arrested, if I recall correctly. In any case, it was a Saturday morning, so I had to attack the breakfast rush by myself. I survived the morning, got all the orders out, even if some were really slow, but I did my best. Breakfast done, I worked on towards lunch. No break. Manager refused to come back and give me 10 minutes off the line after being on the grill for 4 hours. As it slows and lunch starts coming in, I only had 3 or 4 tickets. So I fired them up and stepped into the break room to take 5 minutes to myself. Back comes the super aggressive manager, and she literally asked me, "Do the F, are you doing?" I told her that I'd been at work for over 4 hours. I had not had a break, even to hit the bathroom, and I needed to sit for 5 minutes. She told me to get my ass to the line and get those orders done. I looked her in the face, told her to get effed, and walked like I was headed to the bathroom. Instead, I took off my apron, hung it on the back door, and left. I heard later, through friends at work, that she attempted to cook the orders and do the lunch rush and failed miserably. Ended up comping a few hundred in tickets to very angry customers. Never felt one bit bad about it myself either. It's also the last kitchen job I had. Story 50. So mine is a story of what happens when you put too much notice in. I was an office manager of a chiropractic office. I had 4 doctors that I worked for. I made decent money, but I had no health benefits. After a year of working there, I had received an offer for a job where not only would I make more money, but I'd have awesome benefits. The day that I found out I had pulled the doctors aside and let them know. I explained that I'd be more than happy to train my replacement and I'd work extra hours to do so, if needed. The next day, they had asked the massage therapist to take over my job and asked me if I would agree to stay for 4 more weeks so I could properly train her. I felt some kind of allegiance to the doctors, so I made sure this was okay with my future employer and then agreed to this. Biggest mistake. After a week of training, they informed me that since they had given the massage therapist a $7 an hour raise to take on my role, that they couldn't afford a full month of paying us both, and they were letting me go. I then had to figure out how I could go 3 weeks with no pay, being a single mom. This was the hardest month of my life. Moral of this story: sometimes duck pudding in your 2 weeks. Story 51. Worked at a grocery store. 18 years old. Gave 2-week notice and had a job ready for me after 2 weeks, making 5 times the money. Was ordered to come in at 5 a.m. on my day off to put bread on shelves. Came in. Did it for about 15 minutes and was like, am I really going to ever work for this company again? At any point in time? Nah. Okay, duck this. Walked into the manager's office and said, "Hey guys, I worked till 11 a.m. last night and you got me here at 5 a.m. because one of you can't stack 30 loaves of bread. I'm gonna go ahead and go home. I'm not coming back." They were legit shocked. Went from making $200 a week to $1,000 a week at 18. Story 52. I worked at a country club for a general manager who was a complete pig. He would harass all the female servers and let us out for the night depending on the size of our breasts. I wish I was kidding. He was also just rude and talked down to us nonstop. I was getting more and more fed up with how I was treated. One day during our pre-shift meeting, one of my friends made a joke and I kind of giggled at it, and the GM yelled out in front of the entire team, only at me, "What the duck is wrong with you? I am Freddie Mercury. Take your ducking medication because it sure as hell doesn't seem like you did." I had told him that I had ADHD in confidence. The same day we had a golf outing and one of my father's friends attended, so I was talking to him and I didn't have a tray on me, which we were supposed to have on us while serving, but at the moment I was just greeting guests. And he walks over and in front of my dad's friend, a guest in his country club, he interrupts and says, "You don't have a tray with you. Don't blame your added this time, you're just a ducking git." I was shocked, but finally grew some balls and said, "I doubt my lawyer or the board members will agree with you about that. The next time you will be hearing from me is through them." And I walked out. I contacted the board members. I didn't get lawyers involved, but he was let go shortly after. Story 53. Service industry in high school. The owner was caught stealing tips. What they ended up doing was instead of splitting up the tip jar after each shift, she decided it was a better idea to compile all the tips from the tip jar over the course of a week and then distribute them based on how many hours you had worked that week. So say you get a $20 tip because you had great customer service. You wouldn't see that money at all and would get a percentage of it at the end of the week. based on how many shifts you had that week. About 15 workers and I met and asked each other how much they were getting. We added it up for the course of the week and we realized we were being shorted a few $100s with this new way of distributing tips compared to how much we would typically be making. We called the owner out on it, and a bunch of people quit and a few did on the spot, walking out mid-shift. I quit as well over a phone call. Really wanted to tear into her for being a shady piece of crap, but figured I might need her as a reference, so just said, "Thanks for the opportunity, but I'm going to be leaving for a new opportunity and to continue focusing on school." Later left a really negative online review of the place though. Learned a lesson at 17 that your boss really doesn't care about their employees and just cares about money. Always look out for yourself. Story 54. Being treated like crap, not respecting quitting time, and allowing last-minute trucks to arrive way past the allowed drop-off time. Worked for a last-mile cross-dock operation. Since I was new, I was always getting yelled at for not moving quickly enough. Having to stay till 1 p.m. on Saturdays, we started shift at 10 p.m. Friday to lock up the warehouse bay doors, when day shift could have done so. So I worked for 3 months and quit, and my supervisor, an HR dude, didn't know why. I laid it down for them. My buddy still works there. A year later, nothing has changed. Story 55. I've done it twice. First time was my first job ever. I was working at a fast plus food joint, and I was like 15 just trying to find 2 nickels to rub together. I lived maybe 15-minute bike plus ride away, so it's great. Anyway, I'm pulling every shift I can reasonably work. You need someone to come in short notice? I'm your guy. Need to switch a shift? Have me come in earlier or stay later? No problem. Then, one Sunday it happened. I'm supposed to work a 12/5 shift that day. I wake up with the flop-saw sweats. It's coming out of every hole possible. I call up and say I'm sick and can't make it. They say tough. I explain more. They say tough and try to pressure me. I said, I'm 15. I don't need this job that bad. I quit. Ended up finding a job 6 months later doing dial-up tech support. Second time was in college. I'm on campus in the fall and am once again trying to find monies. Parents made enough where I didn't qualify for stuff, but not enough to really help out. Anyway, I see an ad to be a dishwasher in one of the campus cafeterias. I show up, those shows a bit hungover, and they tell me I'm on omelet station. I'm like, okay, cool, I can clean up. They go, no, you're making the omelets. After being berated by frat bois for several hours on how to make their food perfect, I quit. Never even picked up the paycheck on that one. Story 56. I was working for a small corporation that had on-site spaces throughout 8 states. I was the assistant manager at one of the sites. My manager told me that another site was hiring a direct manager. Since the corporation HQ was near my site, occasionally they would hold meetings at our site. I would be in my office just in case I was called in. During one of their meetings at our site, I took the office time and updated my resume so that I could apply for the manager position that would be available soon. The HR director walked into my office at that moment, but I thought nothing of it. The next day, I was written up by my manager for updating a resume on company time, despite it being for a job inside the company, as was instructed to by the HR director. By being written up, I could not apply for a promotion for 6 months. I walked out of being written up and took the rest of the day off. Then, I no-showed the next day and called my manager to say I was not coming back. I have no regrets despite working there for 4 years. They obviously were not interested in moving their own talent up and instead prioritized petty corporate bullcrap. Story 57. My first job ever at a dollar store. All of my co-workers were at least 15 plus years older than me, and they talked more drama than what I experienced in high school. I don't know what I did to this one lady, but I had enough of it. She spread a rumor that I hugged and kissed this old man that worked with me on the evening shift. Still a teenager, that crap got to me. It felt super awkward every time I worked with him. He was a nice man, kind of odd/creepy at first glance, but he had a lot of crap happen to him over his lifetime. I ended up calling into my boss, basically sobbing that I couldn't come into work with said lady, and that was that. That job was complete ass. Story 58. I was a mobile tire tech who worked 12 to 15-hour days, 6 days a week when I was younger. I had just started dating this chick, and after a couple of months, was invited to have dinner with her parents who were visiting our city. I had told my boss about those and that I wanted that day off. He told me no problem, just remind him the week before. So I went above and beyond and reminded him every week for the month. The day of the dinner, he managed to talk me into a half day of work and then kept trying to add calls on top of it. I reminded him about my dinner date, and he had the nerve to ask me what's more important, a steady, well-paying job or some piece of pussy. I told him fine if that's how he wanted to be about it, and told him where the service truck was, and that I would lock it up and put the keys in the gas tank door and that I was done. Called a cab and left the truck there. He had to drive out there to get the truck and do the service calls himself. As I was filling out the unemployment papers at the Government office, I inquired about overtime laws and told them the story. They investigated him, and about 8 or so months later, I got a check in the 5-figure range for all of my unpaid overtime. Story 59, Dunkin' Ducking Donuts. My manager had it out for me because I wasn't picking up as fast as she wanted me to. She wanted her kid in the store instead, so was looking for excuses to fire me. Well, I got sick and ended up in the air on Thanksgiving, and I get a call from my SIL, who worked through me, saying she heard the manager say that I was being fired for skipping a holiday. So I go in as scheduled the next day with the DRS note, and I give it to her. She smugly starts with the attitude stating she could still fire me. So I turned around and said, "Not to worry, it'll be done today." I then proceeded to make a loud-ass announcement to my regulars who were there that I'd no longer be working for the biggest selfish Karen of a boss I've ever had the displeasure of knowing. And I also let every customer who had ordered food know just how long the meat and eggs on their sandwiches had been in the warmer that day. About 4.5 hours at that point. So nothing was really fresh, made like it was supposed to. Oh, and that their bagels and rolls were also days old, and to enjoy their food poisoning from their 40-plus degree freezer, the manager was too cheap to fix. After my announcement, 80% of the people left, and I bowed out and left. Story 60. I was working the same crafty retail job I'd been working for 5 years. I was a college kid looking for money to pay for food and gas, and I had this job mastered. I knew every item in the store and exactly where it was. Everyone loved me, customers and employees alike. I landed an internship in my field that was better than retail in every way, but I generally liked the place. So I figured I'd be willing to work 1 day a weekend and maybe 1 or 2 short closing shifts a week. Gotta get that booze money. Manager didn't feel like upholding the 1 weekend day rule and was just getting more and more irritable with everyone. The place was usually really laid back, but now mom had a stick so far up her ass, she couldn't even bend over. When it was quiet one day, I was sitting on a counter, chatting with employees, and a customer entered the store. I start getting up to go talk to her, but after about 2 picoseconds of this customer entering, my manager yells, "Get off that counter right now!" I handed in my 1 week's notice the next day, left a note on her desk, and walked past her without a word at the end of my shift. Best part? The DM knew and loved me, and my quitting was a power move that helped get the store manager fired a month later. Story 61. I was there for 2 years and kept getting promised promotion. I went through their 8-week management training and graduated second in my class. Out of 30 people, 5 of which dropped out. I never missed a day of work or ever been late. Yes, really. In the entire 2 years I was there. I even worked the morning of my wedding. After completing everything, they promoted someone else who was terrible, couldn't read or write, and couldn't do basic math. I am not exaggerating, I swear. I even have previous management and military experience. They hid it from me for 2 weeks because I said I would quit if she got promoted before me. Anyone but her. Well, after 2 weeks, I found out they promoted her, so I put in my 2 weeks. I asked why, and they said unofficially. It's because they feel bad for her since she's been there 18 years and can't do anything right, and it would make her upset if someone who was only there 2 years got promoted before her, but I should hang in there because they would promote me next in the next few weeks. Yeah, no. They scheduled me to close as assistant manager for the entire 2 weeks, 6 days a week. So I was scheduled to close 12 million for 12 out of my last 14 days. I closed that night and never went back. Never even turned in my keys. Story 62. I was working retail for a pet store. I was brought on as an assistant manager. The store manager always had plenty of staff on her shifts. I always had a skeleton crew. She never worked on Saturdays so that she could sit around and watch cartoon. Then got pissed because I took off Sundays. I was constantly fighting her over the health of the animals. She refused to listen to me and would do things her own way. She had no clue on what she was doing. I would come into work in the afternoon to find that the animals hadn't been fed or given water. She was walking around the store talking to people. One night, I just had enough. We had a fish that I was trying to get healthy, and she did the complete opposite of what she needed to do. The fish ended up dying. When I confronted her about it, she flipped out on me. I waited for her to leave for the night. I went into the office and left my keys on the table. I then locked the office door and walked out. Story 63. I technically had my 2 weeks in, and initially full intention to follow through. I worked at a delivery place for a few months, and it was pretty horrible. The GM lied about the pay and hours when he hired me, then claimed that I was trained in certain areas when I wasn't, and threatened to write me up over it, when literally none of the other drivers had to do what they were asking of me. Money absolutely sucked. Sure, I was making minimum pay, which was unusual for a delivery job, but I only worked maybe 3 hours a day, if not less. I went from bringing home 60+ bucks a night and tips from my previous delivery job to usually less than 10. The final nail coming home late from work only for my BF to break up with me. I had no intention of staying in our apartment, so I went to go stay at my dad's. I had immediately texted management and let them know that I wouldn't be in for my split shift the next day to a personal emergency, partly because I had to move my stuff out, and partly because I knew I'd be a snotty, crying mess and not presentable. Management got mad and told me I had to come in, so I just didn't show up. Started a better job a few days later too, story 64. I was working a sales job and was doing really well. Even though I worked part-time, my sales put me in the top 3 salespeople, and receiving quarterly commission topped up my hourly earning nicely. My boss used to crack on to all the females, but as he was married, most of us avoided him. One coworker didn't, and ended up being his bit on the side. As much as I was good at sales, I was getting bored and wanted to try something different, so applied for a quality control role. Basically, the boss tells me I'm too valuable to the team to be given that role. So I'm like, so basically I'm making you too much money to try something different. And he says yes. Surprise, surprise, his girlfriend gets the role. Pissed off, I apply for another role in a totally separate department. To cut a long story short, the boss sets it up so I don't even get interviewed for the other role. I gave my 2 weeks notice to resign, but when my team leader asked me if I just wanted to leave right away and use my remaining vacation leave to cover my last 2 weeks there, I was like, yep, and out the door. I was able to find another job pretty quick. Story 65. I was working at a mom and pop candy shop in this new city I'd moved to. Things started out great. It was a super easy job, and for retail, I was getting good hours. Though it helped that they only had 3 staff in total, so hours were kind of easy to come by. Things were going okay, but I went on a week-long trip and came back to almost all my hours cut. I went from being able to contribute to house bills to wondering if my paycheck would cover my Visa bill and phone bill at all. I actually at one point had to dip into my savings because my paycheck was so small. I ended up just giving notice and left with no other job lined up. So to answer your question, the nail in the coffin was having to dip into my savings to pay a bill that should have easily been covered by a paycheck. What sucked was they were nice people. They just had too much on their plate of things that didn't have anything to do with the store. Oh well, I lucked out and found a good-paying salary job that has great people that make coming to work fun. Story 66. College job. Went home for my birthday, took the Friday off. Godfather died the morning after my birthday. Funeral was on Monday, told work I needed an extra day to go to the funeral. Big boss said it was no problem. The boss under him started texting me every 20 minutes the entire weekend and through the funeral demanding that I come in. And he didn't care what the circumstances were or what the big boss said. He kept this stance after I told him my godfather died, and he went on to say that I was obviously just taking the extra long weekend to party for my birthday. Let's ignore the fact I spent my birthday at the bedside of my dying godfather. When I came back on Tuesday, I started getting yelled at by the lower boss, how he had to work the weekend because I wasn't there, and he missed some soccer game on TV. Quit on the spot and walked out. Ultimately, this was the last straw in a long string of problems, including putting me down on paper as working less the 32 hours a week rather than the actual 40 plus. I was working while a student so that they didn't have to provide the ACA mandated health insurance. Story 67. I used to work at Walmart while I was in college, and they refused to schedule my shifts around my classes. When I confronted my manager about this, he basically told me tough crap, and that working at Walmart was more important than my education. After that, I just stopped showing up to work and got a different job without ever calling to say I was quitting. About 2 months after quitting, I had to run into the Walmart I used to work and ran into him. He was super pissed about the whole thing and said some super inappropriate things to me. So I reported him to corporate since I wasn't an employee at the time. Unfortunately, nothing ever came from that, so he still works there. On the plus side, though, he's probably going to spend his life being middle management at a Walmart, which sounds like the worst possible fate to me. Story 68. I was working as a cashier in a grocery store. One night after I counted down my drawer and did the deposit, the manager pulled me aside and claimed that my drawer had been short a few times in the last few weeks. They straight up accused me of stealing $20 on a few occasions and threatened to fire me. Quite literally, they said to shape up because there are several people out there looking for my job. So I took off my apron and threw it at my manager, told them to get on the phone and start calling all those people because the job is now open. For context, I was already making a ton of money off a paper route I had. It got me $80, $120 a week, easy, at a time when minimum wage was $4.25. I only did the paper route for about 8 hours a week, 1 AHR a day, 2 IHRs on Sunday. I worked at the store for about 10, 15 hours a week at $4.25. I didn't need the job. I was just doing it for something to do after school that would make me money. It wasn't worth my time. Story 69. I worked at an airport, so the hours were weird if flights got delayed or canceled. I'd been working afternoons for 9 months and asking for mornings the whole time because I didn't like it much. During this time, I picked up and covered countless shifts, trained probably 20 people, and generally worked hard. He finally gave me a morning shift, effective the following Monday. When I came in for my next shift, the schedule was changed so that I was working horrible hours with my least favorite coworkers. Told him to get ducked and threw my badge on his desk. That was 4 months ago, and I just started my career as a SW engineer making oodles of money. Story 70. I applied at Red Lobster to be a server. I had a friend who worked there who did pretty well and recommended it to me. However, the GM said they weren't in need of servers but would take me on as a line cook and keep me in mind when server positions opened. I took the job and was passed over half a dozen times as servers were hired, and I learned more and more on the line. After 2 years of working there, training at each station, eventually being an assistant KM, and not getting one raise, I brought it up to my KM and GM. My GM actually chuckled when I asked and said something to the effect of, "Yeah, right. I quit immediately before my shift had even begun." I was pretty young at the time, but that manager taught me not to kill yourself for a job that doesn't give a crap about you.